Hello, everyone, and welcome to 180 Degrees of Impact. My name is Matt Scott, and today I am joined by Zakia Moulaoui, who is right here. I always
Hello,
struggle,
everyone.
I always struggle with what to say after I say the person's name, but thank you for joining me, Zakia.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me and making the connection all the way to Scotland. So that's good.
No, it's an honor, and I'm thankful for the technology that allows us to connect from so far because I haven't been to Scotland. Maybe someday I'll go and we'll meet in person. But
There we go. You've got an invitation. You know where to go when, if the opportunity always comes, you're more than welcome here.
thank you. That's good to know. I haven't had anyone else in Scotland invite me to
Oh,
visit,
there we
so
go. So,
I'll make sure to take you up on that offer someday.
yeah.
But for now, we're connecting digitally on 180 Degrees of Impact. And for anyone who's watching, I'm sure they're wondering about all that you do in Scotland and what you're up to. So how do you typically introduce yourself to people or introduce yourself in a professional setting?
So I usually say my name is Zakia, and the first thing that comes up is that I'm French, even though I live in Scotland. Um, because it's a funny thing because sometimes my English is good, but I may skip, or you may hear a bit of an accent, and people are like, or I may not understand a word or something, and instead of thinking, oh, that's because she's French and English isn't a first language, then she's just a bit maybe simple or a bit stupid. So I always say I'm from France, and you might recognise the accent or not. But I'm also the founder of Invisible Cities, a social enterprise that started here 2 years ago, and that trains people who have been affected by homelessness to become walking tour guides of their own city. So we offer alternative tours of Edinburgh and soon of Manchester and Glasgow, and try to show a side of our city that's different to what we usually see on a tour. I've been in Scotland for 10 years, so Scotland is my home. And when I go back to France, I go on holiday to visit my friends and family. And I've been really lucky to work in the charity sector, the social enterprise sector here, a lot with people with an experience of homelessness for different things. And so I feel like I know this world a bit more. And yeah, so I've done international work in the past as well, working with organisations like the Homeless World Cup Foundation, which is a network of street soccer organisations, and they use the power of football to support people who are either on the streets or in prisons and orphanages and in different kind of paths of life. And working with them has opened my eyes onto what the world was facing. I worked in refugee camps in Greece with people like the street papers, which you have a lot in the States, like, you know, magazines sold directly on the street by vendors who also have an experience of homelessness. So always within the social enterprise sector, a bit creative, but also always somehow with people with an experience of homelessness. So yeah, French was a very important part of my description, and then social enterprise slash homelessness is probably the other part.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate that backgrounds because I think what you touched on really is something that I appreciate a lot. Not only about you, but about the people that I talk with for 180 Degrees of Impact, which is that there are so many different aspects to you. Like you are not, of course, just the founder and director of Invisible Cities, but and you're not just your work, but you are so many other things. So I appreciate you sharing all of that. But one thing I'm really curious about is just why homelessness was so important to you, or what that turning point was where it became something that you're passionate about. You mentioned the different street papers, and like in Washington, D.C., we have a great one called Street Sense. And there's a good amount, a little bit of education around homelessness just as you live in a city and go around. But obviously there's not all of that awareness and education. And so I'm wondering, how did you develop that, and when did you decide to do this work with the Homeless World Cup Foundation and, of course, Invisible Cities?
It's an interesting question, because I think so. Back in France, I come from a single parent family, so it's my mom, my sister, and I. And I think we really struggled when I was a child, but I've had, a really great childhood, and my mother's like a total champion. So, but I've always been aware of inequalities and poverty and people who were struggling. And my mother has a very strong sense of social justice. So even when she was struggling, she was always kind of involved in everybody else's lives. She was passionate about trying to support, in particular, women in refuge, facing domestic abuse, things like that. So I think my sense of social justice and equality comes from her, 100%. And then when I moved to Scotland, I actually came in to be a teacher, which ended up not being a path for me, but languages have always been a really great part of what I love and what I wanted to do. So the Homeless World Cup back in 2011 was taking part in Paris. Every year they organise a really big annual tournament, which is basically a World Cup. So all these street soccer projects will come together and they will compete for the world champion title. So back in 2011, it was in France, and they needed somebody to be the bridge to translate between French and English, and to just support within the tournament. And it was meant to be something for 8 months, that involved a bit of traveling to France. So that was something that I was familiar with. And 8 months turned into 5.5 years. And I think it really opened my eyes. Like I said, I had no expectations, and I was full of prejudices about homeless people. If you'd asked me to describe a homeless man at that point, I probably would draw a bearded guy on the streets, an older gentleman, and maybe with a drinking problem, But then having this contact with so many people from around the world at the Homeless World Cup, I really realized that homelessness is such a complex issue, and that it's very different from country to country. And the tournament that took place in Paris was for me life-changing, because it really taught me so much, and I met so many people that today I still have contact with, and whether they were part of organizations that were supporting people, or some of the players, so some of the people benefiting from that themselves. And I think that's where I found what I wanted to do. So it found me somehow, as opposed to me really having a clear vision that this is what I wanted to do. But within the Homeless World Cup, I evolved a lot, and I was lucky to do a lot of things, and to do some fundraising, to do some awareness in schools, so just what you were touching on. What is homelessness, and try to give real life examples so people are a bit more educated about it. But towards the end of my time there, I was traveling around the world and seeing what different projects were doing to support people. So what was done in Romania, what was done in Japan that we could do in Scotland, what was done in the States. And that's when I realized how creative you can be, and how you can really change things if you start something yourself. But also, I think I also realized that there is a massive stigma around homelessness, at least in Western European countries, in the West here, that homelessness happens because of something that you did. So either you're an addict, or you didn't have your life together, so it kind of fell apart. And as a result, it's your fault. So people do horrible things, to folk that they see on the street. And I thought, I know this is not true. and I want to do something to kind of change that. And so this is how I shifted from the Homeless World Cup to wanting to create an organisation myself. And it's that kind of vision of, homelessness is different depending on where you are, um, and people within that are different. Everybody's got a story. Everybody has a different, life, and things happen and or whatever. And so that made me realize that, and also realize that I could maybe do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, because I like to ask the question, like, why you? Because, and I think you explained why, why you decided to do this, and why you felt like it had to be you doing it. But I asked that question because, uh, like, you're doing amazing work that's really important and impactful, but also it's very difficult to address something like the stigma against homelessness in part, or to get people to recognize that stigma. And so I just want to say I appreciate the work that you're doing, because I know that it's definitely not easy work by any means, or it's not as easy as it could be, of course.
It's not easy, but also I think there are so many organizations that do a lot of amazing work about housing or feeding people or training, whatever it may be. And somebody asked me last week, why don't you start having accommodation for people? Because then that would be and I was like, this is not who we are. What we do isn't about this, we try to showcase something different, and we will work with others that provide accommodation, that provide food and housing. So we're not in the kind of like emergency support space, but also I'm not a social worker, and we're not a social team. What we do is we treat people as people and with respect, and we give them an opportunity. If they want to be a walking tour guide, if they want to train further, if they want to do things with us, and if they don't, then that's okay. It's not for everybody. But just the same, if they do come on board with us and then along the way end up, messing up or being disrespectful or whatever, I will say, we provide something positive that you should respect, and we respect you and you should respect us. So I think one of the things that I love the most is that we treat people the same, no matter where they come from, whether they're homeless or they're a big CEO. Yeah. And I think our guides respect that, and we try to, respect that as much as possible. And equally, if somebody is rude, it's not because they're homeless or they've had a difficult background that I will accept that. So I always say, I did a talk once and somebody asked me about it, and I said, some people who are on the streets are big assholes. Some folk are really nasty, but it doesn't come from them being on the streets. It comes because they're a nasty person. So if this is true for somebody in your life, people that you meet, it's also true for homeless folk. And I think that's you can voice that. That's okay. I think it's if everybody's the same, then the statistic chance of you finding somebody you're not gonna like within homeless people is there. So that's what I think I bring to that, is a different way of, we're not pretending to be what we're not by offering, by saying we offer all this support, because we don't, or by being social workers because we're not. We try to have a true and honest way of working, and it works for some people and it doesn't work for others.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think one thing you were saying that I really admire about your work in general is that you're really focused on, I guess you could say, like, providing dignity or returning dignity to people who have had that stripped away through their experiences with homelessness, for one, and probably through other experiences in their lives. And I'm thinking of when I was in college, I was a campus tour guide, and one thing I really actually loved about that, especially when I was in my sophomore and junior year of college, but especially when I first got started, was that I felt like it gave me a chance to have my story heard and my experience heard. And so thinking about what you're doing with people experiencing homelessness, it's, I can't, I mean, it was me in college wanting probably more attention or something like that, but maybe, I don't know, I haven't thought that much about it, uh, but what you're doing is really important because it's almost flipping it completely, where it's saying you're someone who people walk down the street and ignore completely, and you say something to them, even hi to them, and they don't even look at you or say anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's giving them a way to be completely heard through these tours, which is one thing I love about your work, and one reason I wanted to talk with you about the work you're doing.
Thank you, and I think you understand it really well, and I think it's one of our guides, Biffy, she always says, when your homeless people look through you, they don't look at you. And so all of a sudden you are this, and everybody wants to be once in a while the center of attention,
Right.
You want people to like you and to be there and, listen to what you have to say. But we do wider campaigns like the Street Barber Edinburgh, where we give free haircuts and toiletries directly on the streets. And again, that's more aimed at people that are not ready to be training, are not ready to be guides. Maybe they're struggling day in, day out with accommodation and food, but we're able to provide a service that even for half an hour or for that day will make them feel great, because they'll have a new haircut, a bit of gel in the hair, and so it's also part of that same ethos of everybody deserves to feel good, and to have a bit of peace no matter what happens the rest of the time. So it's another way of doing that.
Yeah, I think as a follow-up to that question that I had, I'm wondering, are there any specific stories or people who just stand out to you, who remind you why you do the work that you do, in a sense? Like, is there any story that inspires you in particular?
It's funny because earlier this morning I said if I ever feel down and the 3 a.m. kind of panic of, oh my God, I don't know why I'm doing this. I try to remember one of my first guides who still tours with us, Sunny. I try to think about him, and then I feel that I know why I do what we do. So when I met Sunny, he had been using heroin before, but he was clean already, and he'd been working in the cafe on a part-time basis, but he wanted to do something else, and he's been with us for 2 years, so since the start. And his cafe is also a place where they supported people with employment, and he was completely disengaged from there, and he wouldn't turn up, and then he would be really angry when he wasn't paid, because he'd be like, why am I only be paid £50? And then you'd realize he'd only done 3 hours, so that's why, but anyway, he was kind of slipping down a bit, and I was chatting with this cafe not long ago, and they were saying, oh, how has he been with you? And he has been attending everything. He has never missed a day. He has been filling in for other guys when they missed a day. He's a public speaker now. He started his own page, his own little campaign called Unheard Voices, where he wants to promote speakers with lived experiences of the topics they speak about. And he mentors other guys that come on board. And sometimes I think, is this because we put too much hope and, into him, and too much, is he as good as I think he is? Or is it just me really wanting a role model? And he is so great. And I think, and my answer was, he loves what he does. He loves being a guide. He loves meeting new people. He loves being a speaker. And so he commits to it, and he's great at it. Being in a cafe was never what he wanted to do. It was great because he brought him a bit of cash, but that was it. So he's the story, he really struggled with addiction in the past, with crimes to fund this addiction. And in the last 2 years, he's not been back in jail. He's he's not. And sometimes you can see how things come in cycle, and you would 2 years ago I could see that every so often he'd be down and he'd be kind of considering, oh, what's my next move going to be? Whereas now he's like, I want to focus on my kids. I want to, you know, focus on my mentoring. I want to do more public speaking. So he is my hero, you know, like he's, and he's so great at speaking about it. You know, he really, and the more opportunities you give him, the more he takes them. So he's done an incredible public speaking course recently that we put him on. And the one thing he learned to do was to listen to other people. And that really translated really well. He did another talk and I was like, this is a transformed person. It's not the same, you know. He's so much slower and he listens to the questions that he actually gets asked before just answering whatever he wants to say. So seeing somebody taking that opportunity to learn so much and to change and to do other stuff is incredible. But there are loads of other stories, you know, of people who are the guides who've trained, and another one of our guides was so inspired by our own training, which is like tailored. So we made it up. We went to another organization and together we organize it, but nationally or even locally, it doesn't mean anything. They are, like, it's not recognized. So there are some modules like first aid, which is a national qualification, so you can take that to other workplaces, but overall it isn't. It's just kind of an introduction to guiding. But he went, on the back of that, he signed up to go to college and do a proper recognized guiding course. And he said, I was just so inspired that I thought I want to do more of this. So he's a guide now with us. But again, that's really inspiring to give the confidence to someone to do more. So
yeah, on the flip side of things, when you were explaining that, and especially when you were talking about Sunny, I was thinking about how, like, there are so many stories out there at this point that I think many, as you were sort of pointing to, there are so many organizations that are doing great work when it comes to homelessness. And I'm wondering what are the reactions that you've heard from people who've taken the tours or others who you've interacted with, who, similar to people like me and like you mentioned, especially previous to your experience, who have this stigma against homeless people, whether they know it or not. What have their reactions and learnings been?
In 2 years of touring in Edinburgh, we've never had one single negative comment. What we've had, which is good, what we've had is people saying, oh, I wanted a crime tour and they told me about homelessness and I don't care about that. So, okay, so my answer to this is you should have really read what we were about, because it was never meant to be a crime tour. But anyway, I think there are a lot of people who just have no clue. You don't know. And why would you know? Why would you know what it's like to be on the streets, or what organizations help homeless people, if you have never lived that? So I think the most common feedback we have is it's like going on a tour with a friend. And that's brilliant, because if you think that Sunny can be your friend, that's, the battle is won, I think, because these are people coming together who otherwise would have never met, tourists from California with Sunny Murray from Scotland, but most people want to know and are eager. We find that, the majority of people have an interest in wanting to find out, what it's like, or what organizations are there to help. What are the causes of homelessness? What is addiction like in Scotland? And we get asked a lot of personal questions, a lot of different things like that. And then sometimes you have people who want to do a tour that's different, and homelessness is maybe not the primal focus. They just want to do an alternative tour, something a bit more local, and they find that they're, positively surprised. They get that because they get the kind of dark alley stories not heard on other tours, but they also get like, oh my God, but you were homeless before, you know. So they get that, they get the homelessness angle too in a sneaky way, I want to say, but it's not primarily why they came, and I think that's great because we can educate people. Like we do a lot of like talks and awareness about homelessness. So we do a lot of tours and Q&A because people have just really personal questions that they're not really comfortable asking in front of the group. And so we always finish in a place where you can have tea and coffee, and if you want to ask something else, then you can. So, but yeah, 100% of the time it's super positive. We've had people, you know, who have been mistaken and didn't get what they thought they were getting, but we deal with that. Like every other, you know, tour or customer or product or whatever, sometimes people just don't take the time to read what they're buying. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good though that you know, that you've had that response, and it's good that the like you were saying, that people had the feedback that you would get for any other product or service, of course, you know, once in a while. And that's really reassuring to hear for me because I think of living here in Washington, D.C. and recently, just the other day, I was in New York City. And so there are so many people who are experiencing homelessness. And for me, it's, I've seen a couple of your talks, and I know that you've mentioned how you just wish people would like recognize the person on the street and say something back to them. It would be bizarre if you gave the example of if you go into your office and you see someone and they say hello to you and you don't say anything back to them. Or if you say hello to them, they don't say anything back to you. You start talking.
That's just plain rude, yeah.
That's exactly it. And I think that's one thing that I think is so important to communicate. And I love that example because I think it's easy for people to hear about homelessness and to understand it because, or at least to an extent understand it, because all of us have, for the most part, have had all of us have had some experience with either having a home or not a home, or seeing people who have homes or don't have homes. And so I just think that it's a powerful thing, and it must be so tough to get people to understand the issue. So one question I wanted to ask, as one of my last questions really, is what is something that you think most people don't know about homelessness that you wish they knew about homelessness or about people experiencing homelessness?
I think that it happens a lot more than we think, to a lot more people than we think. I think, and sometimes we have to be more understanding of it. I'll give you an example. I went to a very corporate dinner not long ago, and it was great. We talked about the work that we do, and it was fantastic. And one of the investment bankers came to me, and he says that when he was young, he ended up being on the streets and for about a few months or something, and he really remembered a few things, and he gave some really, like, I want to say weird details, but some of the details that this is a true story because people focus on something particular because in that story that's what they remember. And it was very emotional to then see this room full of people. He'd obviously done so well for himself, talking about it as if it was an issue that would never happen to any of them, or was something that they could contribute to, but it wasn't really touching reality, whereas for him it'd been his life at one point, and he never told anyone anything. I think his point wasn't to come up and say, oh, actually this has happened to me, but he felt that he shared that. So I felt really privileged that he would tell me, but also I was like, actually, in this room it probably has happened to so many people. And I had a friend who worked in a charity around mental health, and she would work with people affected by homelessness, and she got a divorce, and that was like a nasty story. And then she ended up having to sofa surf between my house or the friend's house, you know. And then after a while, she was like, I'm actually homeless. And I was like, look, Lara, like, how did you not know that this? She was like, because I know I have friends that I can rely on. But I was like, you see people who sofa surf all the time, and you tell them that they are entitled to help, that they can do this, that they can do that. So, but when that happened to her, she was like, no, surely not. And so I think this is my one. It happens to anyone, and it can happen to anyone, and it's not a. If there wasn't so much stigma about it, I think we would deal with it a lot better. And that's why my message is just the simplest one, which is to try to chat to people and, you know, be interested in life stories and what's happened, and, you know, and share those details like this person did with us, because they matter. You know, we need to hear the stories of Sunny and Biffy, but we also need to hear those hidden stories of this banker who had been on the streets when he was young, you know. I think because then we'll understand better, and with understanding will come change, you know. And I think it can't really happen if we don't have the wider picture. So
yeah. I think, and also one reason I think the stories are so important is because of something that you mentioned, you know, as early in explaining that and telling the story of the person you were sitting down with, is just that, you know, oftentimes one thing I've learned over the last year or so, or a couple of years, that's been really striking for me, is that we as humans have a tendency to see an issue or see a story. So I might go to an event and see a presentation about hunger or about you know, about death or homelessness or whatever it might be, and we have the tendency to say, oh, well, that can't happen to me because of whatever the issue, whatever it might be. For instance, we might see someone whose experience with homeless might have happened to have something to do with like drugs or alcohol, or it might have had to do with divorce, and we think, oh, well, I won't have that happen for whatever reason. And I mean, that's obviously not the reality. One thing that I think is that you're really communicating is that it can happen to anyone and be something that anyone experiences. And I think that's important for all of us to recognize, because then, like, you know, when I'm, after this interview, when I'm walking down the street, you know, I'll really go out of my way to acknowledge and say hello and look at and make eye contact with the people who, you know, who I am passing on the street, who are experiencing homelessness. So I think it's really great work that you're doing. And as we sort of wrap up, one question I have for you is that if your life were a book or a documentary, what would the title be, and why?
this is the hardest question. What would the title be?
What would the title be and why?
I don't know. I tried to think about this, and I think it'd probably be something like Try Again, or like Second Chance, or I think yeah, maybe Try Again. I think I'm 31 now, but I've gone through different things. And like everybody else, you know, you live pure moments of magic and happiness and pure kind of challenges and horrible stuff. And a few things didn't go the way I thought they were going to go. I never thought in a million years that I'd be living and working in Scotland for 10 years. You know, I'd come here for one and never returned. I'd started a job for 8 months and ended up nearly, 6 years there. So there seems to be a pattern of trying something and it ends up being something else. So yeah, I actually have a tattoo here, which is, I don't know if you see it. It's like a rose. I have a few, but this one here it's like a flower thing, and it was my first tattoo that I did in 2012 in December, because it was meant to be the end of the world. Do you remember that time?
Oh, yeah.
As per the Mayan calendar.
I
So
remember
I
that.
think the exact date was the 21st of December. So I'd made an appointment to go to the tattoo parlor on the 22nd, saying if it's not the end of the world, I'm getting it done because that's my cue to have it sorted. And so I did something that was really meaningful to me and it represented my family, and it was a total mess. It blew out, which is when the ink kind of spreads across, and it looked like a big bruise. So I had to have it covered, and that's why it's got so many colors and it's a bit messy. And this would probably be the cover of the book or the poster, and because I was so sure, like I want a tattoo and it's so meaningful and it's so great, and it messed up completely, and it ends up being a really nice, colorful thing that I look at every day, that I have to look at every day to remember that it's okay. Like, you know, second chance worked better for that tattoo than the first. So I think, and a few things like that have happened to me where plans didn't go ahead according to what I had thought, and for some of the plans they went better than I thought, you know. So I think, yeah, second, or yeah, try again or something like that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, like what you're saying, because I could relate a lot to things not going as you planned. Like one thing I've talked about in a number of my interviews and just different things I put out is that like early about a year and a half ago, after my dad passed away, it was interesting because like I mean you don't expect, you don't really know what grief in your experience will look like, and to your
Mm-hmm.
point of second chance, and also just kind of you have to flow with what life gives you at times. And I think the thing that I realized really recently too is that for me, and it sounds like for you, that there's actually a lot ahead, and there's a lot that is like undecided at this point. And so I just kind of wanted to recognize that. And I love your story, and I'm not sure which one will be the title of your book or
Yeah,
documentary.
there is
um,
a great quote to finish. I think it's Steve Jobs that said, "The dots only connect backwards. You can't connect the dots forward." So you had to believe that whatever happens will make the dots connect when you look back on it. And I
yeah,
think as you do, then they do connect and they lead you to where you are now. But
yeah.
this is the best, like the best quote I think about this ever. So
Yeah, I'm wondering, just as we wrap up, where could people learn more about and connect with you and Invisible Cities?
you can go on our website, www.invisible-cities.org. You'll learn all about the project, but we're good on Facebook and Twitter, and otherwise I use my Twitter a lot, which is Zak Moulaoui, so only ZAK, and then my last name, and Instagram as well, Invisible Cities, and then whatever location you want to learn more about. So Invisible Edinburgh, Invisible Manchester, or Invisible Glasgow are all online at the moment. Edinburgh being really active, so it's probably your best bet to get us. But yeah, and we're happy to have like messages and comments and tweets, and we'll go back to everybody.
Yeah, and since you mentioned social media, one thing I'll say, which is a pattern in a lot of my interviews, is that we connected because of social media, because of Twitter, and I think I don't know. I just want to put out the positive aspect, one of the positive aspects of
Oh,
social
for
media,
sure.
because
Yeah.
I think we hear so much about, especially in the news or in different articles about negative aspects and social. There's even social media addiction that people have, and I think that's all very real. But I just want to mention how appreciative I am for being able to connect with you all the way across the world. Well, not, I don't know about all
Yeah,
the way,
in rainy Scotland.
but
So,
a little bit across the world.
yeah,
And yeah, this means a lot, and I appreciate you taking up the time.
no. Thank you for taking the time and being so interested. It's always really great to speak to like-minded people. So
I hope that
thank
I
you.
have more chances though, and I'm sure I will as I talk with other people to like dive more into homelessness, to talk more with. I have like some people in mind here in DC who work with some of the organizations in DC. I mentioned Street Sense is the name of one
Mm-hmm.
organization, and I'd love to do some interviews with these people at Street Sense and other organizations. So yeah, that's what's on my mind. But if anyone wants to learn more about 180 Degrees of Impact, you can visit www.lets.care. You can email me at hello@lets.care. And on social media at Let's You Care, just search for 180 Degrees of Impact. There's also a podcast version now, so people could check that out. So many ways to learn more about people like you.
Connect.
Yeah, to connect, please connect with both of us. Yeah, thanks again, Zakia. And I think as we wrap up, as I always say at the end of these interviews, first and foremost, thank you for anyone who's watching, and thank you for your time. And please keep up the great work and keep impacting. Thank you.
Thank you.